Hello and welcome back to another episode of Voices of Western. This is the Humans of Western podcast, and today I'm back with another one of those amazing alumni episodes. In front of me here, you can see Geoff Seeman, who is a Western graduate. He went to Western for econ and then later on proceeded to do an Ivy HBA degree. Geoff is an amazing person. I met him through the Venture for Canada Fellowship Program, which I guess we'll also cover. But one of the things I wanted to mention is him doing a semester abroad exchange in France at his last semester, and his current work, which is a senior product manager at PartnerStack. And again, we'll cover all of those in details. Geoff, I wanted to pass it on to you to maybe give a brief introduction of yourself, maybe from the very beginning on how, life was before Western.
Yeah, thanks, Hossein. Appreciate you having me on. Yeah, a little bit about life before Western. I'm from Toronto, born and raised, grew up here, and yeah, spent my life going to school here. I went to Northern Secondary School for high school. But yeah, grew up doing a lot of fun things. I was pretty big into sports at school, and I grew up salsa dancing as well, which was pretty fun. That was kind of my hobby outside of school. And then eventually, yeah, made my way to Western after high school. I taught salsa there for a little bit. I also played on the varsity ultimate frisbee team, which was a ton of fun. And yeah, I ended up doing, as you mentioned, econ for the first couple of years, and then moving into the business program there. And coming out of Western, moved back to Toronto, and I joined a fellowship program called Venture for Canada, which is where we ended up meeting. And after the training camp there, I landed at PartnerStack, which was then called GrowSumo. And almost 5.5 years later now, here I am, still here. So it's been a good ride.
It's amazing. Thank you so much. I guess one of the things I was curious about is how did you end up becoming passionate about salsa dancing? Like what inspired that?
Yeah, it's a good question. People always ask. So in Toronto, every year there's a street festival called Salsa on St. Clair, which you can imagine is on St. Clair, the street. And growing up, my family house is just a couple blocks south of the middle of the festival. So every year when I was growing up, probably starting from 7 or 8 years old, I would go to that festival with my parents. And then we found out that my uncle did salsa lessons as well, and he performed and competed. And so my parents started taking lessons when I was probably around 9. Yeah, but they didn't want to leave me home alone. So they brought me to the classes, and then I was that kid that was like, look, mom and dad, I can do it better than you. Yeah, eventually they realized like, oh, damn, yeah, after watching us for a year, he's actually not bad. So they put me into kids class there, and then that was kind of where I got the start.
And then it's something that continued with you as well, right? You did it during your time at Western. I think you were teaching it. Can you expand on it a bit?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so I guess full timeline, I would have started give or take when I was 10. And then I joined my studio's professional team when I was 12, uh, competed and performed for a few years, stopped for a little bit to focus on getting good marks to get into university just when I was in grade 12. So about at 17 or so. And then in university, I taught at the school salsa club for about a year. And that was fun. It was cool to come in and bring the kind of lesson style that I had learned at the studio here in Toronto over to Western. And that was a really good time, but things got a bit busier in third year moving into Ivy, so I had to drop it after second year.
After all of those case studies and case method teaching, I guess, what prompted you to do a semester abroad in France? I guess a lot of people maybe are not aware of the opportunities that exist to do a semester abroad. Like I know in my program, medical sciences, it was very difficult to do one unless you wanted to do courses that were considered electives and may not necessarily have contributed to completing your degree. How was it like at Ivy?
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting one because I mean, amongst the business schools, you've got, at least in Canada, you've got Ivy and Queens, or kind of the top two that most people consider. Obviously, there are other really good programs like McGill's School and Rotman's getting up there as well. Uh, but a lot of people tend to think of Ivy and Queens. And the exchange culture is so different between the two. And I'd say that other than obviously like case-based versus the lecture-based style, that's probably the biggest difference, is that at Western or in Ivy, honestly, probably, I'm not sure on the exact numbers, so maybe don't quote me on it, but anecdotally, it feels like 20 to 30% of people go on exchange, maybe 30. Whereas at Queens, something like 90% plus go on exchange. Like it's so part of the culture there. So yeah, I always knew that I wanted to go on exchange, and I have an older brother who's a couple years older. He did his exchange in Barcelona. I went to visit him while he was there, and obviously he had such a great time. I also have a bunch of friends that I met at summer camp growing up that are like born and raised in Barcelona and in Paris. So I knew that it would be fun going out there and visiting them as well when I was there. So yeah, it was, for me, it was kind of like it wasn't even a question. Like I always wanted to get over there, always wanted to go somewhere in Europe for 5 months, get out of the city, or get out of Canada, Toronto, London, and move over there. So yeah, I was really glad I did it. But yeah, it was almost like never even a question in my mind. Like I had always wanted to do it.
How did you find about like these whole experience when you were chatting with other people? Like I know we talked about a lot of international students were in your program or in your campus when you were doing the exchange. How was it like when you met so many different people from different cultures?
Yeah, it was really amazing. So one of the good parts about the school that I went to, which is a school called Neoma Business School in Rouen, over in France. One of the great things about it was that instead of renting an apartment or a flat, they put you into an exchange only student residence. And so we had 40, 50 people in the exchange program that from day one were really tight. Uh, and so I met a bunch of people, obviously a bunch from Canada and the US, but then also people from Colombia or Russia or Turkey. So it was cool to meet all of them and, basically have it be like a first year experience again, where you're in residence and everyone's trying to make friends and meet people, but everyone's, also there to have fun and travel around. It's different than first year in that sense, but same kind of vibe, I'd say.
So you do the exchange, lots of fun, graduate from Ivy. What's next? How do you land at VFC? Is that the first thing that happens post graduation?
Yeah, exactly. So in university, when everyone was recruiting, I ended up applying for VFC and got into that program. So I knew that I was going to do that after graduating. And I knew that they had, structure to get you interviews with their partner companies. So I didn't worry too much about recruiting during the last few months of school, because I knew that I would join VFC after and then kind of figure it out from there. So yeah, that's what I did. I ended up coming back from exchange in probably mid to late May of 2018. And then I went off to the Venture for Canada training camp, which is held at Queens, for about a month, for all of June. So it was a pretty quick turnaround. I spent a month there, meeting the cohort, which was a lot of fun. Still friends with a bunch of them. And, partway through that training program, I realized that one of, a friend of mine that I had met a year prior was a Venture for Canada cohort member from a couple of years prior. So I reached out to him, and he put me in touch with PartnerStack because he worked there at the time, and that was kind of how I found my way over to PartnerStack through Venture for Canada. But yeah, Venture for Canada was a blast.
Oh, I guess you did it when it was like a month-long training camp, right? In my year, we did it when it was 3 weeks, and one of my feedbacks was, please make it longer. Like make it 4 weeks, make it 5 weeks. It was so much fun to meet so many different people. from different educational backgrounds. But the one thing that connected us all together was the fact that they were ambitious, they were looking to get into startups, and people who are potentially going to be founders and co-founders and build up unicorn businesses in the coming few years. With AI, like things are just happening so much faster that I'm not even going to say in the next few decades. Now I'm going to say in the next, few years.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It is. I mean, it's really interesting community wise because in most business programs, there's not a focus on entrepreneurship or tech specifically. And I think some programs are starting to add focus on tech, but historically speaking, at least, it's been a lot of the traditional paths and into investment banking, consulting, marketing, accounting. So yeah, Venture for Canada having, in my case, it was 90 people in our cohort. It was a really big one. 90 people that were pumped about entrepreneurship or tech and like startup spaces. Was pretty cool. So it was a ton of fun.
And are you still in touch with a lot of them, or like what proportion of the 90 people that you met you would say have been able to maintain those relationships after the I guess 4 or so years of graduating from the program?
Yeah, I'd say I'm still in touch with at least 4 to 5 of them. A couple of them are like my best friends that we knew each other beforehand as well, so that definitely helped. But yeah, a couple of them are my best friends, so I talk to them basically every day, and then probably a few others from the cohort I talk to every so often as well. But it's everybody's like spread out, and especially because of COVID, people moved out of the city, out of Toronto. But it's nice to see them, whenever I can. But I wish it was more frequent.
So, yeah, well, you can join the alumni meetups that they have in Toronto. Like I remember one of them was hosted back in, was it July, August? I think it was in August. I went to that, was lots of fun. So maybe next year.
Yeah, yeah, I wanted to go to that one. It was held like pretty close to where I live too. So I was like, okay, this is perfect. And then ended up being out of the city when it happened, which I feel like is always how it goes. It's always bad timing. But how did you end up finding out about Venture for Canada?
My story was interesting. So I think there was a Western alumni event, kind of like a, how do you say it? People who were experienced in their careers were invited to be on a panel and talk to students like myself, or I guess like recent graduates, but somehow I found my way into that Zoom event. I saw it on LinkedIn, so I signed up the day of, literally, and I had a class 30 minutes until 30 minutes into the event, so I was like 20-30 minutes late as well. But long story short, I ended up in a breakout room with 2 other people. One of them was one of the speakers, and then the other was a recent alumni as well. And I talked about my ambitions to break into the tech industry, specifically fintech. One of them, who was a VFC 2021 fellow cohort at the time, told me about VFC and she said that she was doing it and recommended that I look into it. So I said, sure, you know what, I can definitely look into it. I will connect with you on LinkedIn. Took a look, sounded interesting, applied for it, and went through the interview stages and got accepted. But honestly, the funny thing is I went there to recruit guests for Voices of Western, and I ended up being recruited to Venture for Canada at the time, which was super interesting. But I ended up getting 2 guests from that event, so we're all good.
Perfect. It's a win-win then.
Yeah, win-win. And that was like the best thing that happened to me, because through that I was able to get connected to my current employer and made some of my best friends who I'm still in touch with. I guess like a handful of really close friends, as opposed to, little connections with tens or hundreds of people. But it's an amazing community. I always speak highly of VFC.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a funny way of getting in touch with it and finding out about it. But yeah, glad you joined and glad it's worked out.
Absolutely. Best times. I guess also like let's switch gears to startups since we're like both in into that area. How
Mm.
does it feel like to be, because at the time you joined PartnerStack, they were early stage. I guess like you were employee number 20, right? How does it feel to be joining a company at such an early stage? Like it's not as early as let's say like 5 people, but still like pretty early, and then see it
Yeah.
scale over the last 5 and almost half a year that you were there.
Yeah. It's honestly really cool. I mean, if I were to sum it up in one word, I would just say it's cool. Uh, Joining as employee 20 is super early on. Obviously, yeah, not as early as employee 2 or 5. Yeah, I can only imagine how crazy that would be and how hectic it would be. But joining as employee 20, you're still figuring out a ton of processes. It's still very much like everyone knows everyone at the office and is friends with everyone at the office. And everyone is just doing whatever needs to get done. So if there's a fire, like everyone's jumping on it. Everyone's figuring it out together. And I'd say the biggest changes as we've grown, the PartnerStack has, I think we're about 140, close to 140, 150 people now. But before the recession and the tech layoffs, I think we peaked out at around 250. So we grew quite a bit, since 5.5 years ago when I joined. But I'd say the biggest change is really that now we have people for everything. Like back when I joined, we didn't have a full product team. We had one product manager who was owning everything, who was my friend that actually introduced me to the company. His name is Nico. So he was running product. And then as we grew, we obviously added more PMs to the team and built out that team. Same thing with marketing. We didn't have a single marketer when I joined. I remember actually one of the first big projects I did was I redesigned the landing page for PartnerStack, and I had to learn how to use Webflow. I'd never touched it before, never done anything like that. But it was cool because you would do those types of things because you didn't have the resources. Whereas now we've got people who are specialists at that and know how to do it and will do it much better than I would have done it 5 years ago. So that's a really big difference, between the 20 people versus the 150 plus. Is I'd say you've got people for everything, or that know how to do it at the very least and can help you through it.
How does the culture change when you're going through a rapid, I guess, expansion? Because the company that I'm currently working in, we literally doubled in size in just around a year, right? We went from like 60s to like 120. And now like we have a lot more processes and established systems in place than we had before. But I also wonder if you notice any other changes that happened throughout this transition.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I'd say so. Yeah, definitely more process that, and sometimes it can be a good thing. Sometimes it can just be red tape. And so, what I'd say is like to all companies that grow, they got to be careful of like, okay, are we putting in process just for the sake of it? Like I was literally talking to my boss about this yesterday, and he said, yeah, like I want to make sure the process that we're putting in place like isn't a fool's errand. And I think that's the way to think about it. Like if you're just adding it because you're growing and you feel like you should, that's probably just going to slow you down and frustrate some people and become really annoying. So yeah, I think overall, I think more process is a good thing. But that's probably the biggest change for sure. Otherwise, keeping culture is an interesting one because culture should hopefully evolve, right? Like if you have a really good culture at 60 and you're wondering how to maintain it to 120, it's going to change, hopefully for the better, right? But yeah, I think it's about, making sure that the first 60 people don't feel differently than the second 60 people or the newcomers. like the newcomer should feel like a part of that culture. So if you're doing work parties, make sure that they're included in the planning, getting the new opinions. If everybody at the company liked to do something before, then the new people that join or aren't super into that, take that into consideration. Like a big one these days, is like the drinking culture at parties. A lot of people don't drink, so like taking that into account when you're planning events and things like that. But there's also culture in how the team celebrates wins. Like, are you talking about wins and on the day to day with the team? So I think those things are important to keep up to as you look to build the culture. It's ultimately making sure that people feel like they're a part of something bigger than just a day-to-day job. Like they're pumped to go to work, they're pumped about the people they work with. So I think it's as much as when people say culture, they think parties and get-togethers and events. It's also like how you work with each other on the day-to-day, how you celebrate wins. Just whether it's like a Slack message saying, "Hey, like congrats on closing this deal," or "Yeah, we just hit this metric. Great work, everyone. We had this customer give this really positive piece of feedback." I think those are all really important things to help that culture along and keep it there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very important to kind of maintain what really worked and at the same time keep it open to new members who are joining to get an understanding if it's still working. Celebrating wins is always like a great thing. One thing that I wanted to add is like as a manager, it's really important to be mindful of things. Like a very well example that you mentioned was like drinking. Some people don't drink, right? So in parties, does it make sense to have only alcoholic beverages? Probably not if you have like people who don't drink, right? So being mindful of those and taking the extra step to like, I guess, see people's dietary restrictions or like what makes them comfortable in a place that they are at is like really stepping up as a leader or as a manager that I think so many people can do, and it really sets them apart in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another piece to it is now since COVID, there's been a big shift to remote work. And so figuring out how you build a culture around a hybrid model, if that's your business, or a fully remote model is I think, a pretty tough task. So our business, for example, we're hybrid in the sense that we've got an office and you can come in if you want, but we don't mandate it at all. So a lot of people work from home, and during COVID, a lot of people moved out from Toronto. So, planning events, we've got to consider the people that are going to be there in person, and then also consider the people that are fully remote and can't even come in if they want to, unless they want to fly in, right? It's a lot of stuff to juggle.
When we were thinking about day in a life of a product manager, a lot of things comes to mind, but I'm not as qualified as you to speak on it. So I just want to give you the floor to like maybe take us through the day in the life of a product manager and what it entails.
Yeah, it's a funny question because I mean it's so simple, but I mean a product manager wears so many hats, to use the cliche, but it really is kind of true. I feel like there are a lot of cliches about answering this question, and I'll say them all here just to get them out of the way. So yeah, you wear a lot of hats as a PM. A lot of people, when they try to define being a product manager, they say, "Oh, basically, I'm the CEO of the product." That's a really cliche one that you'll hear. I do a little bit of everything. That's another cliche. You'll hear all of those things when people try to describe it. The way I like to describe it is you sit in the middle of customers and your go-to-market teams, your internal teams, your users, and your engineering teams. So I am not technical myself. There are some technical PMs, but our job is obviously to not code. Our job is to take user needs and translate them into priorities and kind of work streams for our engineering teams to go and build. So as a result of that, my day-to-days are basically spent trading between talking to our customers, digging into their pain points, understanding what they're trying to accomplish and why, working with our internal teams as well, seeing what they're seeing and hearing from customers, digging into our data, seeing if I can uncover trends like that, and then ultimately, brainstorming potential areas for us to work on, problems that we can solve as a business, and then planning those and putting them into tickets for our engineering team to break down. And kind of as I do that, obviously working a lot with the customers and internal teams, as I mentioned, but on the engineering side, in frequent touch, like every single day with the engineers on my team and my team designer, just kind of brainstorming and working through those potential solutions.
Amazing. I can definitely see where wearing lots of different hats or the CEO of product comes from after hearing this day in a life example. As a person who reports a lot of customer bugs to our engineering and product team, do we ever get to a point where there are no bugs left to fix? If yes, how? If not, why? Is it because of the constant updates that are happening, or like new product features? Why are we not getting to a place where we have no more bugs left?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it was something that I wondered too before I became a PM. Before I was a product manager, I started at PartnerStack as a customer success manager. And so that was something I wondered all the time, right? Like, yeah, why are we shipping things with bugs? This one's pretty bad. This one's pretty small, but like, why are they here? And then I moved into product. And I remember I was talking to a director of product at another company, just trying to understand, what they do, how they think about product. And I asked him about bugs. And I said, how should I be thinking about bugs and how to minimize it, quality? And he said something to me that I really liked, and I've heard a lot since, but this was just the first time I heard it. He said, if you're shipping with no bugs, you've waited too long to ship. And so I think the idea is you should always be trying to push out improvements as quick as possible to your customers, right? There's this idea of the MVP, the minimum viable product. A lot of businesses think about that differently, but the idea is you want to do something as quick as you can so that you can learn from it. Your customers get value from it as soon as possible. And if you're working on perfecting something so that there are absolutely zero bugs, you're waiting way too long. There obviously should be quality tests, and you should have people testing, and you should have automated tests through the engineering teams that check these features for bugs. But yeah, getting to a point where there is zero, I think it just means you're waiting too long. I don't think it's ever going to happen, and I don't think it should happen.
Or you're not introducing new features.
Exactly. Yeah, that is what that would mean. Like, you're not introducing new features, or they are so small, or you're taking so long to do it, right? It's I think honestly, it sounds weird to say, but there being bugs to a limit is better than there being zero bugs, because of what that means.
I guess I agree. I think like customers have to get values from products, and if they do, then introducing them faster is better. And I know we also touched upon running quality tests in advance to make sure everything is working, or at least a lot of it is working as expected. But as a customer, if I'm seeing I don't know, like a brand that I really love or enjoy using their app, let's say bank or my internet provider or anything else that I may be using on a day-to-day basis, right? I think banks are a better example here. If I'm seeing a new feature that has errors or like giving me problems, I'm thinking I would be more annoyed by that and kind of lose confidence or trust or both when I'm seeing all of this problems that are happening or inaccuracy that is with this new feature. So my question to you is this not important, or how is this minimized? I'm sure there's some like back-end analysis, but how is this minimized?
Yeah. So I think you give a good example of the bank, right? Because most traditional banks are massive. They're also very slow. Like, if you know people that work at these big banks, they'll talk about how slow development is. I mean, you can see it like, I mean, ironically, my mobile app for TD just changed, but prior to that, I didn't have any changes to the mobile experience in ages, right? And I think like kind of what we're talking about here and what you mentioned there, like as a user, you expect some sort of, you know, level of quality in the product. And if there are bugs, that degrades it. That's why all these big organizations are slow and allow room for entrance to the market. As a startup, you can afford those mistakes or those bugs in the name of the other value that you provide, or in the name of speed. Whereas when you grow, and this also depends on the type of product you are, right? Like for a bank, for anything financial, yeah, depending, like bugs are obviously a bad look. If it's anything to do with money, bugs are always going to be a bad look, regardless of size of your company. But, you know, for example, if you go into your banking app and there's a button that links out to it's supposed to link out to a new tab. And if that ends up opening in the same tab, that would technically be seen as a bug, right? So there are these like small bugs that impact the experience. Like it's frustrating. You would like it to open in a new tab so you don't have to click back to go back. You can just switch between tabs, things like that. Those aren't going to be a big deal. But yeah, at that scale, you're trying to minimize bugs. So that means you're shipping slowly and you're allowing room for new entrants in the market to come in because they can ship quicker, they can build quicker, and they're okay with some of those small bugs because people that buy from startups tend to understand, at least at a B2B level, that there are going to be bugs, and that's okay. At a B2C level, it's a bit different. Yeah. So yeah, people using banks or like, you know, if you use a mobile app on your phone, that would be B2C. I think it's a bit different in that sense, but certainly B2B is a bit different.
Let's dive a bit deeper onto the B2B understanding or like, I guess, flexibility with those bugs. So B2C, like I can imagine I'm a user myself, so like I would be able to understand what flexibilities I would be able to provide the company with. But how does it look like on a B2B end?
Yeah. So when you say like the flexibility is, what do you mean there?
Yeah, I mean, so when you said like when B2B levels companies choose to go with startups as opposed to established company, right? They kind of expect there to be some sort of issues or problems or delays. How does that look like? So would they give them a bit of leeway room of like, if you mess up once or twice in a month, then I'm still going to be happy with you? Is that expectation going to change over time? That's the
Yeah.
thinking I'm kind of like wondering about.
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is that everyone's different, right? Like everyone's going to have different tolerance levels. It also comes down to, you know, how much are you paying for the software? Like if you're paying millions of dollars for a software and there are constant bugs, that's going to be a bad look. If you're paying like $10 a month for the software and there are constant bugs, is there an alternative that does it better? Right? Like you're always comparing it to the alternative. So yeah, I think it really depends. And with a lot of software, basically it comes down to like, why did you buy? Right? I think that's kind of how I'd sum it up. And when you buy software as a business, you should be looking at your alternatives. So a lot of alternatives are typically like, you know, if you're looking for one software or looking to solve a problem, it's like, hey, do we build this in-house? Do we buy this one software that we've heard of that solves it, or like the industry leader? Then, okay, if we are considering the industry leader, we should also consider these other alternatives, right? Like competing softwares. And so, yeah, I think there's a ton of different factors that go into those buying decisions, but the main ones are probably like price, flexibility. So do they integrate into your current systems? Speed to build? Are they adding new features? Are they adding new features that you care about? Are they building in the direction that you care about? Like, for example, if you're a small, medium-sized business, an SMB, and you buy QuickBooks, like accounting software for small, medium businesses, you know that they're going to build features that work for you. But if you bought some enterprise accounting software, they probably wouldn't be building features for you, right? So a lot of those decisions are kind of prioritized in these buy decisions. But yeah, if you end up at the end of the day choosing a software that's a startup, you're probably going to expect that there will be bugs. And there are things like written into most contracts that talk about uh, a guaranteed uptime, like, minimum 98, 99% runtime, things like that. So at that level, like that's outlined in a contract. Uh, but I think it's just the general understanding that there will be bugs from time to time, but you're hoping that whatever software you buy tries to minimize them. And if they happen more often than not, then yeah, that would be frustrating as a user. But I don't think there's any like hard cutoff on like, yeah, 2 a month, I'm out of here. But I'd say if a user is running into 2 big bugs a month, or even just 2 bugs a month, that's probably a bad look. Yeah. But there's no like set in stone kind of benchmark for it.
Yeah, it really depends, right? Like on the company, on what they need the feature for, how urgent they need it. And I really like the point that you said about QuickBooks as it being SMB focused. So like if you know that the features they're coming out with would be beneficial to your industry or like companies of your size, and sometimes you may be able to say, okay, like even though there are some troubles here, I will stay with them longer just because I know their next feature is going to be help me more than, let's say, going to an enterprise level company. I thought that was a really well explained answer. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I guess now is also the time to dive into the hot takes section. It was one of those super popular things we added last year, and we're like continuing with it this year too. Both of us graduated from university, so we're sitting like on the other side of the question with a university degree. But essentially, the question is a university degree a requirement to advance someone's career? You want to take that first?
Yeah. I think it really depends on what you want to do with your career, right? Yeah. I mean, historically, it's been a great thing to have. And then for a while it became table stakes. Like you needed it to get a job in most of these fields in business. But in the last probably 5, 6 years, we've started to see this shift where it's relatively, or it's getting more common to not have a university degree, but for specific fields. So for example, computer science, there's so many good courses that you can take without university, or outside of university rather. And then you can also just start coding on your own, right? So for computer science, that's one where you can show skills and you can grow those skills. You can build your own business. Like, you can do things that don't require a university degree and are actually more valuable, I'd say, than a university degree. But I don't think a university degree will ever hurt. The only case where it hurts is, I think, if you're, just going to class and getting the degree, but you're not actually like absorbing the material, then you graduate with the degree and, you can't speak to anything that you learned in interviews. Like if you're just getting the degree to get it, then I think it's a bit of a waste. But I hope, and I don't think that most people are doing that. So yeah, I guess kind of summing it up, I'd say it should never hurt to have the university degree, but depending on the field, I don't think it's necessary anymore. And in particular, as an example, like if you want to be an engineer, like a software engineer, at least, other engineers definitely need the university degree, but software engineers, I think you can learn a lot without a university degree, and I think we're seeing that more and more these days.
Yeah, there are a lot of boot camps out there, right? Like a lot of programs, boot camps, free courses on LinkedIn. So much that you could be learning on free, even like Google courses and certifications that take like 6 weeks. It's interesting. So like my take here is when I look at historic reasons for it, historically it has been the case that a university degree separated you from literally anyone else in the crowd, because not many people were getting it for a variety of reasons. I guess the most common one being cost and not affordability. But now, because there are just so many people who are graduating university, a lot of people are ending up being the same, frankly speaking. And so people are like pushing towards other things to be differentiators, like extracurriculars, like starting a podcast during your university years, which is like what I did with a couple of friends. Joining other fellowship programs. And then this begs the question of like, if I'm doing all of these on top of pursuing a degree, is it even worth going to university for 4 years while I can just do these things on the side? And my answer to that is, if you're not going into crazy debt for it and you can afford it, then it teaches you a lot about making connections, networking, and meeting other people. It teaches you a lot about leadership, learning other things, and just seeing what works, what doesn't. And sometimes I just tell my friends, university life is just the easiest because you're only accountable to yourself. You don't have a boss. If you have the privilege to not have to work, you're not accountable to your boss. You're just accountable to yourself. So you can make your own schedule, go to classes or not, and then face the consequences. So it's a lot of decision making that goes into it that you wouldn't be able to experience otherwise, I would say. So my take is do it if you can, but I don't think it's a requirement to advance these days.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I agree. I think, I mean, I love my time in university. I've met a ton of really great people. Like most of my close friends today are from university. But yeah, it's, you're at a life stage where you're starting to get a little mature, or, starting to become an adult. I don't think you officially become an adult until your mid-20s at least. But yeah, you're starting to become more of an adult, at least than you were in your teen years. And most people move away from home and try to do it elsewhere. And so they experience a new city too. And I think it's the whole university experience, I think is really great. And most people I know loved it. No, I don't know anybody that has done it and said, yeah, if I had to go back, I wouldn't do university. So I would recommend it. But yeah, I think kind of summing it up, I feel the same way. Is depending on what you want to do, it's not a necessity for your career, but for personal life, it's always a good call.
And I think people who end up regretting the university choice are typically people who pay a lot for it. And I'm talking about like schools in the US, you probably have heard how crazy expensive they are. Going to private schools, or even I think community colleges are still expensive over there. And like people end up with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, which is like just difficult to pay off in their lifetime. So they start not at zero, but like way below zero. And that's where the pressure builds up. But I guess in Canada, we have these opportunities to pay so much less in tuition. The loans are like there's so much more doesn't make sense. So much less interest rate on those loans. And I'm not too familiar with them, but I know they're so much more student friendly than what we have in the neighboring country, the US.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have been at PartnerStack for over 5 years now. What got you to the place that you are today? What like personal development strategies did you use in these years to upskill, right? To like level up your career?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say the first thing, so maybe taking a step back and talking about the career progression I've had. So yeah, I started as a customer success manager at PartnerStack. I did that for about a year. Then I managed the customer success team, did that for about a year. And then I switched over to product and was a product manager. And I've been there for the last 3 years now. So actually today is my 3 anniversary in the role to the day. So funny enough.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, so over the years, I think I've done a few different things to progress the career. The first is like, at a startup, as I mentioned, really early on, you do whatever needs to be done. Like everybody's jumping on everything. That was probably the biggest thing that I did was as a CSM when I was young, I was doing as much as I could. And And I didn't work like, I'm not saying that to say I was working crazy late hours. I just like, I tried to do everything. Like I didn't pawn things off. I didn't ask people for help if I thought I could do it. So, a good example there is like, I taught myself SQL, or at least the basics, so that I could start pulling data for myself instead of going to the engineering team and asking them every single time. I definitely asked them when things were complex and I couldn't do it, but I would always take a stab at it myself first before I asked for help. And I think over time, that just led to a buildup of knowledge in the app and how the business worked, like as individuals, as functions. I'd say the first thing that I did was try everything instead of defaulting to asking somebody else. Try it yourself. If you can do it, great. If you can't, try it again, try to figure out ways to do it, then ask for help. The next thing is talking to other people that are in the same role or in the roles that you want to be in, either at your company or at other companies. So reach out to people on LinkedIn, go to these networking events. I think it's a really good way to learn what life is like in a role that you're interested in, build a network there so that, you can talk to them about potential opportunities. Building that network both in and outside your company, because sometimes those roles exist in your company. So for me, for example, that was on the product team, and we were a small company, so I didn't have to reach out through different back channels to get in touch with the product team. But I knew our chief product officer well, and the other PMs on the team obviously really well as well. Then the third thing I think is making your intentions clear to your boss and asking how they can help you get into whatever role you want to be in. So for me, it was a conversation with our VP of customer success at the time, talking about, the classic, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I mentioned I had an interest in product. And then 3 or 4 months later, I was on the product team, right? And so it's if I didn't have that conversation, if I didn't explicitly say, hey, I think I want to be in product, that wouldn't have happened. So I guess kind of summing that point up, it's building the network there, making it clear that you want to do something, asking for help on how to get there from your boss or other leaders in the business as well. And then, kind of once you're in it, I think the other way to learn is, just keeping up to date with what's going on. So reading articles, thought leadership. There are some really big thought leaders in the product space that are active on LinkedIn and share a lot of content. There are also some really good podcasts. I'm not a huge podcast listener myself. I don't listen to them every day, but some of them are really good. And I think there are some that produce content like crazy that aren't great. But some of the ones that I really like come out once a week, once every other week, which I think is a pretty good clip. And the one that I'm listening to these days for product management, at least, is Lenny's podcast. So this guy, Lenny, he calls it Lenny's podcast. He's got a newsletter as well. Interviews really, really cool guests that are from these really big companies, huge success stories, unicorn valuations, and has really good conversations. Yes, really good questions. So that's where I've been doing most of my learning lately, is through that Lenny's podcast.
Podcasts are a great way to absorb knowledge as well. If you're in a train or in a bus or transit to work, I find it really useful thing to have in your back pocket to just listen in, as opposed to wasting time, just consume some new knowledge. So that's great. We talked a bit earlier, we talked about hybrid remote working. When I'm not sure if you have experience working entirely remote, but let's say there are people who are working remotely or not going to the office as often, how would those people get a chance to level up? Is it possible? I guess is the bigger question.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible. And I mean, some companies are built fully remote, right? There's a company called Zapier. They were fully remote from day one, even before COVID. There are a ton of others, but that's a big one that a lot of people know about. It's definitely possible, right? And I'd say it should be done the same way. It's yeah, schedule coffee chats, just hop on a Zoom, talk to people at your company, do the same thing with networking. You should be reaching out to people on LinkedIn that you think are in roles that you want to be in, work at companies that you admire and respect. So honestly, I'd say it's the same for a remote culture than it is in person. I mean, it's obviously easier to make those connections in person, but the idea should be the same, that you should be reaching out and trying to have those conversations as much as possible and keeping in touch with those people.
Yeah. And being intentional about those conversations and the messages that you share online, right? Like, hey,
Yeah.
this is where I see myself going in the next year or two. This is what I'm really passionate about learning. Asking people to be your mentors are all great examples for sure. I guess as we're approaching the end of the podcast, one last question is, what is the one thing you hope our listeners to take away from this conversation that we have today?
Yeah, I think if there's one thing that I would take away, if you're interested in product management, I'd say it's a really great career path. What I really enjoy about it is that you still talk to customers, you're really close to them. You're not as close as a customer success manager where you're having 8 meetings a day with different customers, but you're still talking to several customers a week, and you're getting to help prioritize and build the direction that the company wants to build in. So I think it's a really great, excuse me, a really great career path. And I guess the part that we talked about the bugs was a really big one. So I would take that away. And if you are interested in being a PM, knowing that like bugs are always going to happen. And I think having that way of thinking that, yeah, if you're shipping without bugs, you're shipping too late. Because I think most people that go into product management are probably going to be really focused on quality for their first stint as a PM. That like nobody wants to release things with bugs, but it's also going to be important to ship things quickly and get as much feedback as possible. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that we talked about, that I think is something that's interesting to think about, because it's so counterintuitive, right? Like you always want to ship without bugs, but you should be shipping with some bugs, not big ones, but if there are small ones, like that's to be expected.
Amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much, Geoff. This was a very enjoyable conversation. I learned a lot about PM and that bugs are they're an endless thing. You always gotta expect them. I enjoyed learning more about your journey and how you ended up at PartnerStack. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for sharing all of this wisdom with us, and we wish you the best of luck moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Hossein. Appreciate the chat, and yeah, hope things go well for you too in the role. I know you're excited about where you're at now, so best of luck there too.